Folks, this is it. This is the last Friday of the offseason, the last Friday without Ohio State being back on the practice field. It's over, and it's wonderful. It's also a Freaky Friday on the Podcast Daily. That's Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. So freaky that we're going to try something new. We're going to drop in some clips directly from Ryan Day so you can get his answers and not just us regurgitating his answers. And they are about the freshmen, which is the question that we get the most asked about, Berm. Which ones are going to play? We can project. We watched them, most of them in spring practice, but Ryan Day's the expert, so we're going to use his words this week.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to do that. I mean, I think a lot of times that people maybe misconstrue that oftentimes when we're contextualizing answers or whatever, that what we're trying to say is what we've heard from other people and not just our own opinions. I mean, at least I do that anyway. I preface, if something is explicitly my opinion, I try to preface it that way. But I think it is good to hear directly from the horse's mouth in these instances. I think it's also important to note that I think this is the fourth straight Friday we've said it's the last Friday before the offseason ends. But if this one's the real one.
Well, this time it's true because this next Friday, Ohio State will have already finished up their first practice when we do the Podcast Daily.
Yeah, and I hope that people are there. I mean, the tickets for practices are still on sale, apparently, right? Is that what that's what the Twitter told me on Thursday?
There's more left. That's surprising.
Yeah, it's time to get them. I think Jerry sent an email out to the beat to try and spread the gospel that those tickets are available. So I hope people go take advantage of it. The more people that are there, the more access we get. So I'm glad that they're actually taking advantage of that. I know you're a little bummed that it may interfere with some summer slamming, but I think it's great. And we have, as you said, one week and practice starts. And until then, there's a little bit more time for speculation. And in this case, it's not entirely baseless because we have Ryan Day's words. And when you talk about the freshman class, there's a lot of really good players in that class. It was a top 5 class, like every Ohio State recruiting class is. But when you have a player like Jeremiah Smith in it, it seems like he gets all of the attention for good reason.
He got plenty of it. And those 3 Buckeyes that were in Indianapolis on Tuesday talked glowingly about Jeremiah Smith. Ryan Day had done that a lot throughout spring, and he seemed to want to avoid some of the out-of-control hype and maybe even hyperbole, but also maybe not hyperbole about him. So on Tuesday, when asked about him, he said this.
Again, I'm trying not to go down the road too long with him. It's easy to see how talented he is. I think the thing you already recognize, though, is that he's really good at the no-talent things as well. But I'm going to hold off comments until he plays his first snap at Ohio State.
He probably won't be able to stick with that, Berm.
No, and I'm wondering if he's doing that because, during the Ohio State spring game, he was talking on the field pregame and we're not going to put JJ out there much. We don't want to risk it. When you start to talk about a freshman in those terms, I think that the expectations obviously get a little bit reckless, and I certainly have contributed to that myself. I think he will be the best receiver on Ohio State's team this year. I think he will be the best receiver in college football, pretty widely regarded as such by the end of the season. I just think we say the word generational quite a bit in college football recruiting conversation. But in this case, as long as he stays healthy, I think that he has a real chance to do that. And the primary reason is not because of just his unbelievable, freaky athletic ability. It's because of what Ryan Day said there, the no talent things. Jeremiah Smith does the no talent things, which means shows up on time, which means listens with his eyes and ears when he's talking to a coach, which means taking coaching points and actually applying them and not just assuming I'm the best receiver in the country, I don't have to get better. Those are the little things. And he came into Ohio State as a player who had every right and reason and opportunity to be braggadocious and over the top and egomaniacal, and has not done that at all. And I think that's the most impressive thing. The players talking about him, Denzel Burke on Tuesday when we talked to him, they don't think the pressure gets to him. Emeka Egbuka has said nothing has changed for Jeremiah. He does not act like a guy that is a freshman. He does not act like a guy that gets that hears the outside talk. He just goes about his business. And that is really rare because for those kids from South Florida, especially that have come up through the 7-on-7 machine, there's an opportunity to really buy into your own press clippings. And Jeremiah Smith certainly knows that the expectations are freakishly high for him, but he does not seem to allow that to change him at all. And the interactions I've had with him this summer at Ohio State, when he's out there just watching a 7-on-7 camp at Ohio State, like, he's still the same kid, and he just wants to watch football and watch people play receiver. And I don't know that Ryan Day is going to be able to defer answering questions about him throughout the entire fall camp, but I do understand the impulse to do so, because he has not played a snap of football at Ohio State, and the expectations. Let me ask you this: can you remember the expectations ever being higher for one player who had not actually played a snap?
I was going to ask you the same thing. I was racking my brain about that on Thursday. Like, we've already had that conversation about how enormous the pressure, outside pressure, is on him. He doesn't seem to feel any of that. I think the last person that this really happened with at Ohio State, and there've been a number of top-ranked players at their position throughout the dozen years that I've been covering Ohio State now. But the only time that I felt like there was anyone that was approaching, like, media members have to ask about him at every opportunity because the fan base demands to read about him and will read literally any quote about it. I think it was Torrance Gibson. Maybe you disagree with that, but I especially after he moved to wide receiver. And again, that's not necessarily pre-true freshman year. I think that was the most out of control that some of the stories and coverage got for a player that I could, before he had accomplished anything at all at Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, before he accomplished anything, I think Torrance is a fair discussion. Before he actually ever played a snap, before he ever played a game as a freshman, I think I'd have to go back to Terrell Pryor almost with the absolute buzz around everything he did and where he came from. And obviously that was before either of our time covering the team. But as a fan, I remember just you could not talk about Terrell Pryor because you knew he was going to play a lot as a freshman, even though Todd Beckman was returning. The physical abilities, the freakish size and speed, the ratios, the things that you saw him do in high school, he was different than anybody else Ohio State had recruited at that position. And Torrance, because he was regarded, I think, as an athlete coming out of high school and not necessarily a player that Ohio State believed would be a quarterback long term. I think that mitigated some of the buzz and some of the hype. But when you talk about Jeremiah, Ohio State just lost the Biletnikoff Award winner and arguably the best receiver any of us has ever seen in person at Ohio State. And there is an expectation that Jeremiah Smith is going to come in and not skip a beat and be as good or better than Marvin Harrison Jr., which in a normal world, you would tell people to shut up. That's stupid. But
that is normally what I do.
Right. But it's when you see the guys, and that's why I have bought into the Jeremiah Smith hype more than maybe some of the other freshmen, because it's the way that the players on the team react when you ask about him. That is the difference. And they do not hold back.
Generally, and I'm not just talking about the coaches, as you are pointing out, when veteran players are talking about true freshmen coming in and they get asked about, especially at situations like Big Ten Media Days or throughout training camp, who's caught your eye, who had good springs, they'll say, this guy's going to be really good down the road. You can see flashes of it already. He's not intimidated by the situation. Once he gets some time and understands the playbook, he's going to be good. And that always informs when you and I have these conversations and I'm talking it's not what the program needs for true freshmen to play. That means that they've missed ahead. They're not developing. They created needs on the roster that shouldn't have to be filled immediately by players before they're ready. I still feel that way about every other player in Ohio State's freshman class. And I still feel that at wide receiver, I don't even feel like Jeremiah Smith came in and was oh, this is a clear need because Emeka Ibuka's there, Carnell Tate's coming along. There's Brandon Ennis with another year. I was this wasn't a desperate situation. It's not that part's not changed my mind. Like, I think Ohio State would still be very good at wide receiver in a world where Jeremiah Smith didn't exist. It is because what he did in March and April that I saw with my own eyes was so otherworldly impressive that I know he's going to play. It can't be stopped. I might as well just embrace that part. And I think that that's fun. I hope that it doesn't become too much for him. Doesn't seem like it will. We talked about that in June, and you threw out some of the hype and the fact that he could be a Bolitnikoff finalist as a true freshman or be in the Heisman campaign. I hope that doesn't lead to disappointment if he doesn't have 200 yards in week 1. I don't know what it's going to look like. I think that's the part where Ryan Day was trying to slightly pull back on the reins a little bit, because he's the only one at this point who can like try and reel at some of this in, because he also caused it with the way that he talked about him, as you said, during the spring game, again in June, when he was having conversations about his progress. That seems like a minor thing for me to be concerned about, because like all signs are pointing to the fact that he can exceed rational expectations. But that's why we keep talking about him in a way that's, at least it's unusual for me.
Yeah, and I think that there's got to be a balance somewhere in there where you're tempering expectations about statistical output, for example, versus like flashes and what he does, because I don't know that we're going to see him have 60 catches or anything like that as a freshman. I think that's probably too many to expect. I don't know that he'll have 1,000 yards. So the Ohio State offense this year is designed probably to be built around the run game, and the addition of Will Howard as a running, like, I don't know that we're going to see a statistical first year. And I consider Marvin Emeka's first year in 2022. Like, I don't know that we're going to see a statistical output that's even comparable to those guys in that year. But that was a CJ Stroud passing offense, and this is not. So, and we already talked about on the Thursday Daily the role of Emeka Egbuka in the offense and how much it may be centered around him, not because he's a better receiver than Jeremiah Smith, but because he's more versatile and may be able to line up in ways that Jeremiah isn't, because he can play out of the backfield and do things. So, like, I think that the hype train can go 100 miles an hour with and do that, like, rightfully so, even though statistically it may not end up being a season that people are going to look at and be like, oh my gosh, you guys let us down. He actually only had 40 catches and 800 yards as a freshman. He sucks. Like that's, I mean, I would then say, find me another Ohio State freshman receiver that's ever been close to that. And that's, I think that's going to be the conversation, more so than, historically speaking, how do his numbers stack up with the best numbers that any Ohio State receivers ever had. It's probably not a conversation that would fare well for Jeremiah. But as far as a freshman goes, and where that means the future could be, I think that that's where the conversation is really going to be.
It's going to be fascinating when we get to the Bold Peas episode for the season projections, and we all have to drill down on Jeremiah Smith numbers. We're not to that point quite yet. I'm glad that Ryan Day sort of peeled off with a separate answer for the Ohio State freshman wide receiver, because he was also asked about the class as a whole and who else might contribute. And so these are Ryan Day's words about the rest of that class and what might happen.
Obviously the two running backs are, going to have to play. They're going to have to play. They're going to get games and get carries. Milan and Demarion Witten just got there. So when you get there in the summer, you're a little bit behind. So they get some ground to cover. It's hard for offensive linemen to make a major impact early on defense. Edric Houston's probably flashed the most, but we're pretty deep at defensive end. Jalen McClain has done a nice job, so you'll see some time this season for sure. Who am I forgetting?
Do you like what you've seen so far from Aaron Scott?
Aaron Scott had, really as the spring went on, he flashed more and more. He's had a good summer. Bryce West was injured, so I haven't really seen him do a whole bunch, but we'll kind of see what we got there. Both the young linebackers, we'll see.
I think, Berm, that list was the right amount. He didn't just name everybody and they're doing this and that and the other. Like, the amount of Ohio State freshmen who could actually reasonably play snaps of consequence, that's about it. I can't really imagine it going longer than that.
Yeah, we were asked about it on the mailbag last Friday, on the Freaky Friday, right? Like who we thought which freshmen could play, and we on defense. And I think the only names that we mentioned were Edric Houston and Jalen McClain. So those are the only two that from that clip of Ryan Day and that conversation with him on Tuesday at Big Ten Media Days that I got any sense that he thought they would play. I think that we will see Aaron. Now, I also think Aaron Scott, because of the way the schedule is, because of the length of the season, I'm not going to be surprised if he ends up not redshirting. I think you'll see him playing the 4 games because of his ability to contribute on special teams and other stuff like that. But as far as like maybe taking meaningful snaps for Ohio State this year, it seems pretty clear to me that it's Edric Houston and Jalen McClain. And I've been very high on Jalen McClain. I think I've discussed the comparisons around him being Jordan Fuller-esque before he signed with Ohio State. And now after seeing him in the spring and talking to him in the spring, you can tell that the dudes on the team have a ton of respect for Jalen McClain. They like him a lot as a guy, like walking around in the back of the defense. Fortunately for him, Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs are there. So he doesn't need to be thrust into that role of like, you got to be the guy early, but I think that there should be great confidence in what he's going to do moving forward. And I think the most important thing Ryan Day says there is when you're talking about guys like Mylan Graham, for example, or Demarion Witten, or even Leroy Roker, who got in late, like the detriment that these guys who do not enroll early experience at this point is substantial. And it kind of sucks because I think everyone should like enjoy high school and finish high school and go to prom and do all that stuff without having to worry about immediately starting your college career, the minute you walk out of school for Christmas break. But like, it's clear how much better the opportunity is for the guys that enroll early. And you can see why Ohio State has made it a priority in the last decade to make sure that guys do that if they can.
Yeah. And I also don't, when you switch back to the offensive side of the football, it is not coincidence in any way, shape, or form that he's starting that conversation with James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon. That is a spot where what I said earlier must be applied here. They are going to have to play because Ohio State has wound up with a deficiency. Those top 2 guys, Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, you're not going to find a better combo. We've made that point repeatedly. That's the best 1-2 punch that anyone in the country can have at tailback. But after losing Dallin Hayden, after losing Mayan Williams, after losing Chip Traynham, they did wind up in a spot where the numbers are not where they need to be, and true freshmen are going to have to play before they're ready.
And losing TC Caffey, right?
And TC Caffey's injury, of course. Yeah. So that's some of that may have been in their control. Some was not. An injury in the summer off season, that's out of your control. Could they have, if they had known maybe what and Ross Bjork was talking about $20 million being out there for NIL and how much Ohio State, not directly, but collectively was spending on this roster. Could they have maybe looked ahead and said, oh, maybe Chip Traynham is worth
that extra 100.
Yeah. To stick around. Like maybe that is a conversation that in hindsight, you think, oh, maybe that would have been a better use of resources. Or as I mentioned earlier in the week when we were in Indianapolis, maybe if the timing had been different, another player in the transfer portal could have been pursued at that point to supply some depth. There's nothing they can do about that now, right? I mean, if players are in the portal, they can be obtained, but it is July and camp starts on Thursday of next week. So this is the situation that they're in now. And that means that, and James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon had good springs and they have a taste of experience. They are not summer arrivals. They've been able to go through this. And for Ohio State's case, you're hoping that works in their favor, but that is the one spot on this roster where you look and say, well, okay, now true freshmen, ready or not, you're going to have to be in the picture.
It's also the one spot where you can understand maybe why other potential transfers wouldn't want to transfer into Ohio State. I mean, because most of the time the transfers are coming in with the idea or the vision of being a contributor right away. It's hard to find a player who's got multiple years of eligibility on the transfer market who is going to come in and sit and wait to play. Like that just does not happen. And even for Chip Traynham, had Ohio State been able or decided to match the amount of money that Kentucky was offering him, I don't know that it would have mattered, because I think Chip in his mind felt like he wants to be the number one guy. And when at some point you see Travion and Quinshon, like, that's how that's going to play out. And yeah, Chip's value was obviously off the charts for Ohio State, but it's hard to convince a guy going into his 5th year of college that you need to be the third running back. And so I think it's a situation where the real unfortunate part of this is TC Caffey's injury for Ohio State, because that puts a lot of question mark. But it's also like Will Trell Hartson, the walk-on from Massillon, Washington High School, who transferred after his freshman year. Like he would be in a position right now to have an opportunity to contribute. He was a really good walk-on and a player that Ohio State liked quite a bit. And so, it wasn't just the fact that you aren't able to go get someone else. It's that Dallin Hayden, who would have been in line absolutely unequivocally to be Ohio State's bell cow running back a year from now, didn't feel the need to do that. And I think you can almost thank your lucky stars that Ryan Day did such a really great job making sure James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon were apprised of what was going on with Tony Alford, and making sure that when the running backs coach job vacancy occurred, that there weren't more attrition, because there could have been a situation where one or two of those guys left. So it could be worse, but it also might be a lot better, because I think in the long run, Ohio State is going to be benefited by James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon getting the ball a lot as freshmen, a lot more than they would have otherwise. And so I think that's actually going to turn out to be a long-term benefit for the Buckeyes, but it does mean that there might be some precarious moments if an injury bug happens in that room again this year.
Yeah. So that's about the extent of it there for a Freshman Friday. Looking ahead, forecasting into camp. I know you have a thought. All right.
My thought is, maybe, as we talked earlier this week about the wide receiver room and the depth at wide receiver, and Ryan Day looking for someone to fill in that 5, 6, 7 spot, maybe we have not discussed Demarion Witten enough, because he was initially recruited as a tight end. B, he came in late, but as far as just his athleticism and his ability to do some different things on the field, I'm not going to be shocked if Demarion Witten ends up being a guy in late October, November that we start to hear a lot about as pushing. No, he doesn't have the deep speed of Jaden Ballard, but the size, the athleticism, the ball skills. I'm going to say this right now. Outside of Jeremiah Smith, as far as the high school tape and what you've seen on film, there may not be a guy with better ball skills in that room than Demarion Witten. And so I think it's one that's worth thinking about. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Ryan Day mentioned him, because in the big picture of the Ohio State recruiting class and of the Ohio State 2024 Buckeyes, I think he's been glossed over quite a bit because no one expects a lot, but I don't think his name is added in there without reason.
I wonder how much of that is just because the initial projections were like, well, he's coming in to be a tight end, and it's going to take a long time for him to become that. And now, based on what you're saying and the early look at him, it's like, well, he's probably not going to become a tight end. He's going to need to stay outside. And it's just an adjustment of expectations. He's
like Noah Brown, but with a next level of athleticism, like that size and that sort of ability as a receiver, the ball skills, but the athleticism is closer to a big time wide receiver prospect. And he does not get talked enough. And I don't want to sit here and say he's going to end up surprising and being the 5th receiver or anything like that. But I think that there's a real opportunity for him to make a splash this year.
I feel like I thought you would just say Mylan Graham was going to be 5th by October.
I mean, I think that's very possible. I mean, Mylan Graham is electric, but my opinion is that Mylan Graham's adjustment period to college will be a longer curve than Demarion Witten's.
Okay. Well, that's the first I've heard of that. So that's a little bit of Berm insight to wrap up.
I said my opinion. I want to be clear.
I know. That's you. You made it clear from the start.
It's a callback.
Callback to the start of the show. There's a lot going on because camp starts on Thursday. This has been a busy week on the podcast and with the podcast daily. We appreciate everybody who's been with us for that and throughout the entire offseason, because guess what? Now I really mean it. It's going to be over by the time that we have the next Friday edition of the podcast daily. We'll be back on Monday, a couple days, see what else is going on with the Buckeyes, and we'll get ready for training camp starting on Thursday. If there are tickets out there, grab them. You'll see us out there for all 4 of those practices that are open starting Thursday at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. For Berm, I am Austin. This has been the podcast daily for Friday, So long.